So I see many familiar faces. I just started coming to these events. I don't know if John Knox is here today, but I have to give him thanks for inviting me to these meetups. And before I dive in, I also just wanted to first and foremost acknowledge the vital work that all of the nonprofits are providing to all San Franciscans and in the Bay Area. It is hard work. You are in the front lines, and oftentimes, coming from the government space, it's really difficult to really understand what's happening day to day because we're not out there every day. We can't be there every day, and so your strong partnership and your service to this community is really greatly appreciated. And I just wanted to be the first to say thank you for your service. Um, I also wanted to make note that behind every data point is a story, and that story evolves over time. And how do we capture that story and many, many stories to really begin to paint a picture about what is the current state of our city and how do we move forward, especially given the dramatic impacts of the pandemic and the systemic, longstanding challenges that we've historically had to deal with over the decades, compounding that, right? So we are in this space where we are in permanent remote work in some areas, and how does that impact economic recovery? Um, Folks are moving out, people are coming in, right? Like, how do we begin to understand the needs of the community and what are the changing demographics of that community, right? And how do we prioritize those needs and who do we need to reach out to? Who has the strength and the resources to plug in? Where can we actually go to a single place where we can actually see that so that decision makers can make the right decisions at the right time and really push the city forward into a better future? So today, I'm sorry, it's upside down. Today, I really wanted to talk about how, as organizations, can we build data and analytics capabilities to really improve outcomes and our impact. Um, Before I dive in, I really wanted to just get a quick show of hands. I love to understand the demographics and where people are coming from within the space. How many are from nonprofits? How many are from faith organizations? How many are from the government? Web3 space, all right? Tech, generally? Others, did I miss anything? Any other industry? Okay, so we're all coming together under a common uh, desire to support and help with our given capabilities. And so I wanted to first ask the question, why is data so important to our organizations? And how does it improve outcomes and fulfill our mission as separate organizations? And how can we bring all of that together? It's really important that, especially with the declining revenues, as I mentioned before, with the permanent changes in our society, given remote work and everything is online now, how do we deal with prioritization, dwindling resources, limited resources? How do we measure our true impact instead of just our output? Because there's a fundamental difference between how we are moving the needle and reporting how many people we actually served. Well, how many people did you serve that then gets into housing permanently, right? Are we tracking that journey all the way through? So in the tech world, we talk about the customer journey. Well, what is the customer journey or the client journey of somebody who is unhoused, right? Where do they land up? Do they land up in the hospital? Do they land up with housing? Where do they go? I'm just going to let that pass a little bit. Data also helps us to identify gaps in services. I'm just going to set this down for a second. And that's really where, as the former chief data officer for San Francisco, that was really where I was focusing my efforts on, was really building up a team that can then identify those critical gaps in services. So that we can make more informed decisions together and then help the decision makers prioritize where they need to. These are common pain points around due to the lack of data or the lack of good data or not having data at all. These are the things that have surfaced as part of the research that my team had done when working with across all 62 plus departments across the city and county of San Francisco. How many of you have experienced at least one of these things when you are trying to make a decision about who you need to help next? Or what initiative you should be investing in? Or what kind of money or how much money you should be asking your investors or your funders, right? And why? The big question is always going to be why, and how are you going to demonstrate that impact, right? So what data do you point to? These are the common challenges that, at least in the government space, I have seen and observed with my own eyes. And it is truly a blocker to providing the incredible service delivery that everyone is so passionate about. Agencies are full of people who want to help, but they don't have the clear insight as to, well, who do I prioritize first? So because of this, we really need to take a step back and really ask ourselves, how can organizations maximize the value of their data to drive impact and improve collaboration across teams and agencies and organizations? These challenges have real impacts downstream, and this will really hit your pocketbook. So every year when you're trying to put together a budget and then an ask around, okay, how do I manage my workforce? If you are a nonprofit, how do I manage my volunteer workforce, right? Where do I push them? Where are the critical areas across the city where we're seeing that incredible need? How do I respond to changing conditions on the ground? What are the changing conditions on the ground, right? Do you have a map of where these hotspots are? So that, over time, as you're meeting weekly or whatever your cadence is, you can ask these questions every week or every day so that you know where to go. And then what changes do we need to identify, or what changes need to be made in terms of like how we actually provide that service, right? Do things need to change in that regard? And so all of these are informed by data that needs to be collected in a way that is managed, protected, and shared, that still protects and respects individual privacy. So today, what we will cover is, I'm going to talk a little bit about DataSF, which is the program within the City and County of San Francisco that I led. We're going to talk about some of the strategies that we implemented to really push forward, right? Like, we have all this data, what do we do with this, right? And how do we really help the leadership make better decisions? Third, we're going to talk about specific use cases based on the open data that is available to anybody and everybody through our open data portal. And then lastly, I'm just going to go through and provide some practical tips for organizations who are really wanting to leverage the data that they have, or really think about how can they align their mission with their key metrics so that you can actually have better analytics to make better decisions. So I'll start with DataSF, and DataSF is the centralized open data program within the City and County of San Francisco. If you go to datasf.org, you will find data. There's over 1,200 data sets that are publicly available there. We were one of the first open data programs in the country. It was originally founded in 2009 under then Gavin Newsom. And then over the years, it has evolved to a much more mature set of initiatives, which I'll go over. And basically the mission of DataSF is really to equip staff and the public with the data that they need so that they can make more informed decisions. In San Francisco in particular, what makes San Francisco unique among the cities across the nation is that every department across the city is mandated by law to make their data publicly available. That is the difference. You can go to other cities and they may not have that. They may have an inclination for that, or they may want to encourage that, but it is not often a requirement. Here, it is a requirement. And I want to focus on 3 of the 4 strategic data initiatives that our team had focused on to really build up these data capabilities. One is around data sharing. The other is really around building up the data science function And then lastly, I wanted to talk about the Data Academy that was really focused on equipping the workforce with the skills that they need to understand how to use data better. So I'll start with the Open Data Portal. If you go to datasf.org and then click on Find City Data, you'll come to this page. And essentially what this is just, you know, the data that the city has is really, this serves as a central data repository for all of the city's information. This is everything from COVID data to police force enforcement data to 311 data, all of, you know, everything that you can think about when you think about the quality of life of a city and how it functions. Many of the data sets are actually here. And I'll go through some of those use cases in just a moment. But the key responsibilities for a data team, at least in San Francisco, is really number one, to know what data you have across the city. And in this, so the form that this took was a data inventory, basically a catalog. And this is also publicly available on the Open Data Portal itself if you just put in the keyword data inventory. There you will find hundreds of data sets that list out by department or by, you know, service sector, what data is available and how those are informing public services. The second key thing is that making the data available and actually easy to use and consume. We also are responsible for making sure that the quality and the accuracy of the data is actually correct. So working with constituents, with departments, to making sure that their data is fresh, and then maintaining the infrastructure that really brings all of this information together. Now, the Open Data Portal, you know, is very popular. We have over 7,000 downloads a day on any given day, and over 100,000 API requests to access this data, and thousands of page views. The second pillar is really around building up our advanced analytics capabilities, and this is through data science. And this is a figure that I thought was really interesting, and I would be very interested to hear from your own perspectives. You know, do you experience the same thing where more than 40% of city services require more than one department to actually deliver that service, but their infrastructure, the data infrastructure, is not linked? So you can have department A, B, C, D, right? If we think about the continuum of care, the figure that Paul had shared around this continuum of care, right? Like, you know, how do you develop that continuum of care and actually like visualize that and understand it at a deeper level? And so what this taught us, especially at the height of the pandemic, was it really highlighted the fragmented nature of the, you know, department's data management practices and how difficult it was to share data across. And so we really had to ramp up very quickly. What are the best practices? How can we get everyone who is providing the same like continuum of care service in the same room to talk about data definitions, to standardize their data, to compare metrics? Are you measuring the same thing? Are we answering the same question? Like, what is the priority and how is this all, how's every department funneling up into that top line metric of success, of delivery, of responsiveness, and of stewardship of resources, right? And so when I first started, this was one of the key things that I focused on. I was like, let's solve for the gap. What's the gap, right? And who are the people that we need to bring together? And so this is a slide that I always like to communicate to folks, is that we are all, every single one of us has a part in building the city of the future, whether you are a nonprofit, a tech company, you know, the government, right? Everyone plays a part in influencing our built environment and what kinds of businesses and construction and services are provided, right? But what we lack is a clear data feedback loop on how to iteratively improve policy, service delivery, right? And having the data behind that. So this was a huge paradigm shift. When we think about open data, the origins of open data in the government space was, the goal was, let's just get every department to share their data on a centralized open data platform. So we did that, right? but it didn't tell us much, right? What are the questions that we're answering with that data? And so when I started, this was a huge, it's like turning the turning the tide a bit, right? Like, okay, we have the foundation, we have the tech, right? Now what are the questions? So really, this was moving from a department or agency or nonprofit centric view of data to a service level view of data, which requires collaboration and data sharing and data standards. So this is an example of, if you want to know how long it takes to build housing in San Francisco, these are all of the departments that need to collaborate and share data. So my team stepped in and tried to link all of that data. And one of the things that we uncovered, and this is not just unique to San Francisco, because I've worked in other cities, they were collecting similar data, but not similar enough to where you could like actually normalize, harmonize the data. So then we had to actually then take a step back and say, are you calling, is a house a unit? The same thing as a unit? Is the same thing as a guest house? Is the same thing as transitional housing? Is the same as da 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 da, right? So then we get into nomenclature. So we really had to do that work of really deeply understanding the business practices and the perspective of what is actually housing, what does that mean, and really starting there to then inform better data collection and management practices that can then inform, well, do we need to change the metric because are we measuring the right thing? So this is a total paradigm shift of how we share data and really having it viewed at the service level and how we're doing there. So that brings me to the initiative that we focus on, which is Integrate SF, essentially linking the city's data around services, uniting it, harmonizing it. This is data science in action. So these are, I'm beginning to transition into some of the use cases where we actually used, because data is messy, right? So we need people who are well-versed at understanding how to work with messy data. So data scientists, analytics engineers, data engineers, et cetera, to really understand the business problem that we're trying to solve for. So in this case, you know, for example, like street crisis response, one of the key initiatives that we supported was street crisis and helping the 9 street crisis teams who are out there come together and link their data, right? So that we can understand who's being served, what is their outcome. Because this is what was happening. And again, this is politics agnostic, okay? It doesn't matter who's in the seat, because this has been a systemic thing that we are trying to change, is that they were comparing line by line spreadsheets on a weekly basis. Now imagine trying to do that for thousands of people that you're trying to respond to, right? Who are in dire need of help. And so, you know, this, you know, so the ability to have the roles in place and the investment in place to really expand analytics within an organization can really have some tremendous impact because it can save time and money. In this case, for example, with affordable housing, how many of you have heard of Dahlia? That is the city's affordable housing lottery platform. So you can sign up today if you want to get on a list, right? And it was very difficult because it didn't require a login to actually, so you couldn't like match up identities. People can actually submit multiple applications. And so using data science, we were able to reduce the amount of manual work that it took for an analyst to review applications from weeks to hours. And so this is the power of having analytics capabilities built into your organization. I'm not going to go through all of this. This is a roadmap, but I am happy to share that with you all. But essentially, we had to put a lot of teams on a data quality improvement plan, right? So when we think about Web3, tying it back, right? Like, so if we don't have good quality data upstream, how do we expect good decisions to be made downstream, right? So it has to actually start here You have to start here. It's two sides of the same coin. You need good data. In order to get good data, you need good data practices. In order to have good data practices, you need to have collaboration and agreement around what you're going to be collecting and how often, et cetera. And then the last piece is really focused on upskilling the workforce, your workforce, right? How do you do that so that folks can tell the story, so that they know how to analyze the data better? And this is a little bit dated on the slide. It doesn't show like to 2024, but this just gives you a snapshot of, so we had a data academy that focused on providing critical skills around data visualization, storytelling, and how to work with data, and some statistics. And what we had found was that, and especially during pre-COVID, I can talk about post-COVID too, is that there is measurable savings, cost savings. So rather than having your staff figure things out on their own, grab data and they're not sure if that's the right data or not, and then go down the rabbit hole, like let's centralize that data so that they know exactly what data you use, and then we can save them time and money. And this is real. Post-COVID, so when we relaunched the Data Academy, when folks were able to come back, we saw, so the last number that I saw was there were over 8,000 staff members on the wait lists for these classes. So now we have to think about scale. How do we scale this? So a lot of the courses were taught by staff, right? So now we need to rely on third party as augmentation to the delivery. But this just, people are hungry for skills so that they can actually do their work better. So now I'm going to move into some of the use cases here, and then I'll dive into, well, what can you do, right? So one of the data sets that is on the Open Data Portal is the shelter wait list, right? Since we're talking about homelessness. This data is, it's challenging. So again, this is an example of the city is providing this data so that you know where you are on the wait list. And it's based on a unique ID that you're assigned once you sign up to get on the wait list. But we're trying to move towards transparency so that this is available. So everyone can see where they are on the wait list. And if they have any questions, they could just call, right? But they know they can just keep checking back. This is another one that I think is relevant to what we're talking about here today. This is about access to the most basic things. So this is a data set along with a map that shows where all of the public facilities are. Bathrooms, where can you take a shower? Drinking facilities, water facilities, right? And this data set continues to evolve as we learn more from the different departments who maintain these public facilities. This is important because, where can you go? The signage may not be clear, or you're not sure if this is even a public space, right? And so, there's a map for that that's available. Real-time law enforcement data, right? The team worked very hard with the police department to get this data in more real time, near real time, on the Open Data Portal, so that the public can understand where are the hotspots for law enforcement, what type of activity is happening, right? So I want you to start thinking about, like, yes, these are different data sets, but if we bring them together, what does that look like? What is the picture? What is the data picture of San Francisco if we start layering these things up? And then one of the other ones is around performance scorecards. So the controller's office, they manage the cities, they oversee the city's performance in certain key areas. And so, are we doing good, bad? Red is bad, green is good, yellow is, working on it, right? Ambulance response times, right? So this can tell us how busy staff is, our emergency response. So if they're responding to hotspots, right, in certain areas of San Francisco, how long does it take, right? And how can we evaluate resourcing for that in the next budget cycle or more immediate? And then finally, property information map. This is available to anybody and everybody. You can find out information on individual properties in San Francisco. This is everything from code enforcement to property tax to zoning. But again, this tells you again, like what is allowed there, right? What is the situational awareness there when you start layering things on, right, on top of this map? This is related to reducing traffic injury. Where is that happening from a safety perspective? Where are people dying on the streets, right? Which ones are safe? Which ones are not safe? COVID reporting. So, and the list can go on and on, but I really just wanted to highlight that there are many use cases, not just for staff to use this data, but also for the public to be able to use this, nonprofits to be able to use this to then inform your own operations and your own priorities. The last bit is I wanted to talk about practical next steps around how can you build data capabilities within your organization. So I have 5 kind of starter ones. This is not a master class. This is just an introduction, but I really wanted to talk about, here, if you think about data as a support element to push your mission forward, to fulfill your mission to serve the underserved, right? Where does data add value at every step of the way until you actually make a decision? So we talked about earlier about aligning goals with metrics. We talked about, okay, how do you manage that data? What data to collect that's informed by your metrics and your goals? Everything that's in red is hard. This is hard, right? This requires negotiation, data sharing, right? Like, is it an organization willing to share? Who's going to make them share? No one can make them share unless you're in San Francisco. Then, but these are the things that you should start thinking of. You should start thinking about is like, how do I build the critical support systems to really help push operations and optimize our operations and optimize our service delivery, right? And here are some practical next steps for you all. And I'm just going to go down the list. Number 1, we talked about data governance. And data governance really just means what are the rules, the processes, the data privacy protection rules that you need to be thinking about to protect the data, to share the data with whom and when, right? And who's going to oversee all of that. That is a job. That's a full-time job, and you actually need a team to do that. And that's what DataSF was doing. Workforce planning, right? If you want to build up your data capacity, right, you need the right roles, or you need to train your staff so that they can become more equipped with data skills so that they can analyze your data and collect it in a more appropriate way. You also have an opportunity to look at your tech stack, right? Like, what technology do you use now to collect the data, analyze the data, share the data, report on it, right? And then the last 2 is really around who do you share with, and how do you design your data infrastructure with privacy by design as an element? Because especially in this space, you are working with very vulnerable people who may not want to share data with you, right? So how do you handle that when you're trying to understand who you're helping and where and what happened to them, right? So there are some things that we need to start thinking about when it comes to data privacy. We want to protect the individual, but we still need to know where they went, right? Like, what was the outcome, right? So there's a balance there. And I think that is it.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I know that we're going to have a fireside chat conversation, but were there any specific questions that we might have for Michelle? Did anybody have anything related to? We're going to hold off on the technical questions in terms of data specific questions. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Kathy. I run a nonprofit in the Tenderloin, the Healing Well. And one of the challenges that or one of the strengths of our organization is that the people who come to us appreciate not being subjected to a lot of private questions. And you know that, and you've experienced that, right? We don't care if you documented or if you know what community you're a part of or what your age is or vet, right? Just come in and experience that. Because one of the hard things is, right, with our community, oftentimes people are tapping into so many different organizations, so they're subjected to this stuff all the time, and you start to feel like a number rather than a human or a subject, rather than a person with a story. So we have to kind of figure that out. And at the same time, we've got the very practical reality that we do need to know who we're working with. We do need to know what is helping us accomplish our mission. What's not? What do we need to change? What do we need to add? Right? The other thing that we think about is, it's easy for us to do such things as, we offer free wellness classes. So we could easily say on a scale of 1 to 5, how'd you feel when you came in today? And now how do you feel when you leave? People are, that's easy. And people get tired of that. It feels like we're cheating. And so we've come up with some creative things to do, and some people don't read, some whatever. So, how do you feel today? Pick up a red or a green or a yellow card and pop it in this box. And then, at the end of the day or at the end of this experience, you can do that. My question actually is, are there any, you probably can't directly answer this, Michelle, but can you guide us with organizations or experiences that you've had that seem to balance well the recognition that people are humans and they have stories and they have privacy that needs to be honored and respected, with the practical need and a critically important need for us to assess who we're working with and what difference we're making? So I'm looking for ideas on who has struck that balance well and what are they doing, because we're all trying to do that.
That's a really good question. And it is tough depending on the service that you provide, right? So my general rule of thumb is, if you don't need the data, don't collect it. Just don't. Because there's a risk to collecting sensitive data. There's a breach, people can get hacked, right? It may land up in the wrong hands, right? You can come up with a data sharing agreement, but then if there's turnover in your organization, and if there's not like an onboarding plan to continue and perpetuate those rules and processes, those things get lost. And so that's my general, and I that's what I advise everybody is, like, if you don't actually need that, then don't ask, because it's not critical to your service delivery. Now, if you need to find out like where they landed up, there are some ways around that, right? Like hospital, or but I guess we'd have to kind of dig deeper into some of those operations. But
So for the sake of time, we were actually going to skip the rest of the questions, so we're going to have to go straight to the fireside chat. So I want to give you a round of applause for your presentation here.
Thank you so much, Michelle.